Joe Rogan made a bold move when he announced the move of his podcast to Spotify. Now, that was pretty shocking for his audiences. After the host had gained popularity on YouTube, the move didn't make any sense. And what followed was a $100 million deal, a series of mind-boggling controversies, and a huge wave of backlash. Let's break down when Joe Rogan revealed YouTube's weird shenanigans that forced his Spotify switch. First off, what's up with YouTube's demonetization policy? Imagine showing up to work every single day, and when it's paycheck time, you get nothing because your boss can't begin to agree with your opinions. Or worse, your much more popular peer made an anonymous complaint against you, and now you aren't getting it at all. That's exactly how YouTube's demonetization policy works, more or less. Some veterans of the platform have protested the ambiguity of the code of conduct multiple times, while others decided to take their business elsewhere. And Joe Rogan happens to be one of them. It's true that such strict regulations have limited hate speech on the platform, yet at the same time, many political commentators who thrive on right-wing politics weren't happy with the policies. Then there was the "can we copy strike PewDiePie" saga that stopped being funny very quickly. One takedown request and boom, your channel is frozen for a week. YouTubers don't have an HR, but we're pretty sure all of this accounts for a hostile work environment. If you're a content creator, you already know that YouTube's advertisement algorithm changes all the time. And if the platform decides your content isn't worthy of running ads, then your job will quickly turn into a 9-to-5 unpaid internship. No matter how popular the channel gets, you won't be making any money. These rigid and inescapable regulations have made many YouTubers ditch the platform. Ever wondered why Joe Rogan suddenly shifted to Spotify for his podcast? Well, let's break it down. Up next, what has Joe Rogan said about YouTube? The popular UFC commentator took a huge risk when he announced that he'll be shifting his podcast to Spotify to make more authentic content. Now, all of that sounds like fun and games until you realize that the Swedish music streaming service is subscription-based. Either you take a hit on your wallet to listen to uninterrupted Joe Rogan ramblings, or you get hit with an advertisement every 8 minutes or so. Hate YouTube all you want, but it's still going to be free. So if someone as popular as the podcast king is risking a big influx of watch time, you know things are fishy. And who's better to set the facts straight than the man himself? In an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, the host opened up about the tough decision he took when he had to completely rebuild his platform. According to him, Spotify was genuinely interested in watching him succeed and staying sincere with his audiences. And YouTube couldn't have been more different. Every other episode of the podcast was getting reviewed by the platform. And surprise, surprise, many of the podcasts were demonetized. In other words, Rogan and his team weren't earning revenue off the episode. Now, that's gotta sting. The host of JRE spent most of his time worrying about his future on YouTube, and that's on multiple demonetization penalties. For your first penalty, the algorithm freezes your channel for a week. On the second penalty, you can't do anything with your brand for 2 weeks. As the strikes pile up, your channel becomes useless. Next thing you know, you're searching for a job on Craigslist and selling your equipment. Joe Rogan wasn't having any of that. After he got the opportunity from Spotify, he jumped on that board immediately. But just like any other JRE saga, this one is also far more complicated than it seems. And we're going to unpack the controversy now. Moving on, is it demonetization or censorship? The plot thickens. There's no doubt that social media giants aren't above and beyond using their regulations for a political agenda. So why would YouTube stay behind? In a shocking revelation, Joe Rogan revealed that his former platform was finding ridiculous ways of censoring him by threatening to take his revenue away. A lot of episodes didn't earn any money because the host was swearing explicitly in them. Hold up, what? Okay, we're not going to read 40 pages to make sense of YouTube's regulations, but we're pretty sure swearing didn't warrant this harsh of a reaction. Like, hello, whatever happened to making efforts to remove racist content from the platform? That's still not the bigger picture here. If you look closely, every time JRE got hit with a demonetization threat, the hot topic was something political. Most notably, every episode that centered around COVID-19 was either taken down or couldn't run any ads. By the looks of it, all of this seems like a censorship attempt without making it obvious. Sounds fishy, doesn't it? Now, in a much more progressive America, implementing censorship laws is no different than shooting yourself in the foot. We know it seems like a stretch, yet Twitter has lost a lot of revenue and audience after it banned Donald Trump from the social media site. Yep, some people are cool with the mass spread of misinformation because, well, political alignment is a thing. As soon as JR realized that YouTube can now dictate what he can and can't talk about, he knew it was the right time to make some changes to his brand. The Spotify switch didn't leave many fans happy, but losing that ad money became tiring. For a politically charged podcast, an accepting and open-minded platform was the need of the hour, and the Swedish service offered the best benefits for JRE to take off for much wider audiences. Famous last words, right? So how much did Spotify pay to host the Rogan podcast? In the entire YouTube versus Joe Rogan fiasco, the video sharing platform came out as the last man standing. And here's why. In May 2020, Spotify signed a $100 million deal to house the Joe Rogan Experience for years to come. We don't know the exact details of the contract, but we're sure that the 286 million Spotify users will be listening to the podcast for free for years to come. So far, numbers are in the favor of the king of podcast, as the podcast is free and mostly ad-free. It's obvious that we'll be hearing more from the host on the same platform. So when the music giant is spending that sort of money, they'll want to avoid any and every controversy. By the looks of it, JR clearly skipped the memo when he made some whack claims about the COVID-19 vaccines. And oh boy, talk about getting yourself into a big scandal when you could have just Googled facts. Now, let's unwrap that, shall we? Next up, how did Joe get into many controversies? When the world was paralyzed by a health crisis, Joe Rogan was making some wild claims about the Pfizer and Moderna breakthroughs. Instead of encouraging his audience to take COVID precautions, he told them that vaccines are actually gene therapy. Yep, and that one episode was enough for the entire medical community to come for the podcast. On Twitter, the demand for removing the Joe Rogan Experience from Spotify grew wild. Things turned more sour when JR didn't take a cue from his fans and continued with his COVID lies. He even went as far as to claim that the pandemic is a hoax and vaccines are just experiments. And that's not the only thing that caused the king of podcast to lose his audience and money. What was more wild was the fact he featured right-wing personalities like Milo Yiannopoulos and Gavin McInnes weeded out in his podcast. And nope, didn't pay heed to his audience's demands. Finally, how did Spotify react? The truth is that Rogan was under a lot of heat before the COVID-19 fiasco, but the ambiguous Spotify regulation policies kept the podcast out of the line of fire until the canceled Joe Rogan party took off on Twitter. Unlike YouTube and Twitch, Spotify doesn't have any strict policies regarding censorship and misinformation, but when the protest against the JRE gained momentum, the Swedish music platform was forced to act. What's interesting is that many artists and musicians threatened to pull out their music from the platform if the company didn't deplatform JR. Many African American artists were upset that a lot of racial slurs were being used in the podcast that went unsanctioned. And you know how it works. A lot of musicians decided to put pressure on Spotify until it deleted or censored more than 70 episodes from the podcast. That wasn't the only time the company had sanctioned JR. Back when the king of podcast had started on a new platform, almost 40 of the episodes were banned for promoting a white supremacist rhetoric. Even then, Spotify execs refused to comment on the entire fiasco. They removed the episodes in the middle of the night and just got on with their day. So the call is clear. The music platform has invested $100 million in Joe Rogan, and they'll count every return of their investment. On the other side, Joe's big plan to overshadow YouTube and its hard and fast regulations went down the drain. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think Joe Rogan's switch to Spotify was a bad idea? Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.